Hey everybody, AJ here, and welcome back to the Eagle Ray channel where we do all things DIY electric boats. This is the much more informal version of the channel where we just talk about the latest electric marine news. Usually have a 10-minute or so video coming out every week. I'm trying to put them out on Wednesdays. It's been tough for the holidays, but on the weekends, on Sunday at 2 p.m., we always come live with a live stream. So we have a giveaway to do. It's the Milwaukee angle grinder that I've been trying to give away for a while. If we can get 100 people in chat, we will be giving this away along with a 5 amp hour battery, about a $200 value. Smash the like button, see if we can get 100 people in the chat today. If we do, at the end, we will be giving this away. But let's get straight into what we're going to cover today, because I want to talk about battery temperatures, because I've seen recently in the forums, and it's winter time, it's seasonal, so people are wondering if their battery is going to survive the winter if they leave it out in the cold. So we're going to take a quick look at that. Sorry, let me bring this up here. So the first thing we're going to do is look at a few batteries straight off of Amazon, and we're going to compare the specs from one to the next, because you'd think that if a battery has the ability to manage its own temperature, that would kind of work the same way for each battery. But the truth is it's going to be quite a bit different from one battery to the next. So I grabbed some batteries that have internal heaters off of Amazon, and we're just going to compare what they can do from one to the next and see how it affects their pricing. Because some of them offer an internal heater as an option, which you upgrade to for a slightly higher price. So is it worth it? The question we want to cover, I think, by the end is, do you even need a battery that has self-heating capability? Or is that just one of those bells and whistles that they try and charge extra for that nobody really needs? I think the debate can be pretty strong one way or the other, because there are certain situations where your battery is going to be damaged if you aren't handling it properly in the cold. So I live in the Arizona desert. I never have to deal with this. So usually when I tell people which battery to buy, I am often suggesting the one that has the best budget pricing, because I don't have to worry about these bell and whistle upgrades like an internal heater, because I'm never going to need to heat my battery up. Even in the dead of winter right now, it's like 60 to 70 degrees outside. So if you're in a climate where it snows and you do expect to be bringing your lithium battery out in the snow, this is the video for you, because there may be a situation where you could damage your battery just by using it out in the cold. But specifically, I think people get this confused easily, because it's not when I say using the battery, I'm talking about a specific part of your use of the battery. When you discharge the battery by plugging something into it and running it, that's not going to hurt your battery. What happens there is with lithium, and there are lots of different types of lithium, but specifically in this video we're focused on lithium iron phosphate, because that's the popular chemistry in the marine industry. So with lithium iron phosphate, you will get lower performance if you use the battery while it's cold. If you discharge it in cold temperatures, I'm talking around the realm of 0 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to get lower performance, or something like 80, 70, even sometimes 65% of the normal capacity that you would expect, and the normal amp output momentary that you would expect from a given battery. You're going to get less when it's cold. But that doesn't mean that you're going to hurt the battery by discharging it when it's cold. The way you can hurt the battery is by charging it when it's cold. And so if you bring the battery out and you use it until it's at 0%, as long as you don't charge it up while it's still at freezing temperatures, your battery is going to be totally fine. You don't need one with a heater. But if you know that you're in this situation, like for example, I made this little graphic here just yesterday. If you're in this situation, and you know that your battery is going to be out on the ice with you for several hours, you know what temperature it gets on your frozen lake. If you're running down into the realm of about 0 degrees Fahrenheit or below, you're going to want to think about keeping your battery warm if you need to charge it while you're in situ. Well, if you have a generator in your truck, or if you got a hotel near your frozen lake and you bring the battery back and you plug it straight into a charger in the wall, or if you live right near a lake and you just bring it back home and plug it into the charger you have sitting in your garage, the battery may be still at those very low temperatures, and if so, it's possible you could destroy it in theory. It's not very likely, honestly. So I think a lot of people just don't have to worry about this. But it is possible. And so it's pretty difficult to tell because a lot of, especially cheap LiFePO batteries, will not even give you a way to measure the temperature internally. And that's the real key. It doesn't really matter what the temperature of the case is on the outside. If you put a heat gun on the battery, you can tell when it's getting really hot because you see the temperature of a certain component inside the case radiating through. And so because it's a drastically different temperature from everything else around it, you can tell there's something in there heating up. But when it's getting cold, it's a little bit harder to spot that with a heat gun. And so the best way you can tell what the temperature of your battery is internally is if you have a temperature sensor on the inside of the pack. And because most of these packs are sealed, the only way you're probably going to get that done is if that's provided to you as a feature from the company you bought the battery from. So let's look at the first of those because not every lithium battery has those features available. Typically these days, even the cheapest budget lithiums will give you low temp cutoff protection in the BMS. So inside this battery, for example, usually either on top of the cells or on one side of the pack, there will be a circuit called a BMS. And that thing does a whole bunch of different functions, including balancing the voltage of each of the cells. It'll protect against overcharging, over discharging, over temperature, and then often, and this is kind of a newer thing, but a lot of these cheap BMSs will give you low temperature cutoff. So if you're out in the cold and it drops below, usually it's something like 4 degrees or 0 degrees or -4 degrees Fahrenheit, it'll cut off the ability for the battery to function until the temperature comes back up. And so low temp cutoff is a feature most of them are just throwing in anyway. But on top of low temp cutoff, the more advanced feature that some batteries are including now is internal heaters. So they just take a small heating pad and they stick it to the side of the cells, and sometimes they have a couple of them, and they put one on each side of the cells, and they activate those heaters to bring the temperature back up so that if you're out in the cold and you're going to be out in the cold for a while and you need to charge and you go again with that same pack without bringing it back to a warm room temperature place first, you can do so without having to move the pack. Now that's probably not where most people are going to be if they're in like an ice fishing situation, for example. But it does still apply when you're in this situation because if you take the battery out onto the ice and then you bring it back to the truck and plug it into your generator, it's probably not going to have changed temperature very much. So if it was able to get down to 0 degrees, it's probably still near 0 degrees when you plug it into the charger, and that can be a real problem. So should you buy this battery? Well, let's take a look at what it can do. It says low temp charging, self-heating. And like I said, most of these do low temp cutoff automatically, but it's important to distinguish when we're looking at how these things work that there are two specific functions. One of them is when the BMS is monitoring the temperature, it can tell the battery to disengage, and then separately it can determine whether the heaters should turn on or off. And so the complexity of when all of those things happen might be different from one battery to the next, and you do kind of get what you pay for, hopefully, in a lot of these cases. So let's take a look. This battery costs $289.99. So among the budget brands, this one is pretty. It's on the upper end of the budget range. So right now for the holidays, I'd say the average price for a budget brand lithium battery of this size is going for about $250 on Amazon. And then a lot of the time, if they have extra features, they'll charge a little bit more for that. So because this battery has this self-heating feature, it looks like they're charging a little bit extra. But how much extra? Well, if they have one that doesn't have that feature, then we can see how much it would be otherwise. The interesting thing about this brand Votrer, which I've never owned one of these, so I'm not vouching for this brand in any way, but if they had just a regular 12 volt 100 amp hour with no extra bells and whistles, I imagine it would be about 250 bucks, because you can see here they have a Bluetooth version available, and all that means is you can use an app to see the condition of the cells, the voltage of each cell individually. You can see the internal temperature of the battery. The sensor that's attached to the BMS in there, you have access to it if you have a Bluetooth connectivity. And so you do have that with this version, but on this version, importantly, you don't have the heaters. So the Bluetooth version is 270, which is probably, maybe 20, 30, 40 bucks more than it would be if it didn't have Bluetooth. That's often what they'll do, is they'll charge something less than 50 bucks extra in order to give you the Bluetooth feature, which in my opinion is kind of silly, because a lot of these BMSs just automatically have Bluetooth capability built in most of the time, and so the brand is just turning that off when they sell you the cheaper one. Since it's there already, they should just leave it on all the time, in my opinion. So actually, Votrer in that way is doing that. They're charging 270, and they're not selling you a cheaper one that doesn't have Bluetooth, because they're not pretending that the battery doesn't have Bluetooth. It always has Bluetooth. And that's often the case with these batteries, even when they don't sell you that feature. So on top of that, though, they're charging 20 bucks extra, $289.99, if you get the internal heaters that are attached to the cells. And so should you pay 20 bucks extra in order to have a battery that can heat itself back up when it's really cold? In my opinion, most of the time, probably a waste of money, even if it's just 20 bucks. Even if you're in this situation where you're out on the ice and this thing is sitting here, probably reaching 0 degrees eventually if you're out there all day. I'm not sure, I've never been ice fishing before. You guys will have to let me know in the comments. Do you go ice fishing? Have you been on a frozen lake long enough for temperature of your gear to reach 0 degrees or below? I don't even know. When you go out, are you out there for 8 hours, or is it just you're out there for a couple hours and then you got to come back in because it's too cold? I don't know. You got to let me know exactly how it works out there. But in theory, I imagine it's possible for one of these batteries to reach a temperature of 0 degrees if you have it sitting on the ice. I suppose also that you probably put the battery inside some kind of case, and inside that case, you might put some insulation that prevents the low temperature of the environment from getting to the battery too quickly. So that might cause you to not need to consider heating for the battery in general. And in fact, that's kind of a thing, even if you're not out on the ice or in an extremely cold climate. I have heard of people who use batteries like this for off-grid solar setup. So if you want to power a cabin with a solar panel array, often you'll take this kind of battery and you'll put it in a shed, and it might be really cold out there. Maybe it'll reach below 0 in the wintertime when it's snowing outside. But does it get that temperature inside that shed? It might get pretty cold, but then also, does it get that temperature inside the battery? Because a plastic case doesn't radiate heat very well. If your battery's made of metal, it might get very cold inside that battery. But if the battery's got a plastic case, it probably retains whatever heat was inside pretty decently, the same way it would if you put a jacket on. And so the one thing to keep in mind is if you're discharging the battery regularly, like for example, if you brought the battery out onto the water, and you're using it to power, maybe you've got a light or a stove to something to heat your hands, whatever you're powering with that battery. If you're discharging the cells continuously while you're using it in the scenario, the cells will actually keep themselves warm, because they will lose something like 1 to 3% of the energy that they're sending out as heat, and they'll just automatically warm themselves up. And so it will be a little bit toasty inside that box as long as you're putting the battery to use. But if you happen to have a scenario where you're in a situation like this, very cold outside, the battery is subjected to the cold weather for an extended period of time, and you're not discharging it for an extended period of time. You just have it sitting there, and it's just collecting more and more cold for several hours, then you might be in a situation where the internal temperature of the battery is 0 degrees or below. And that's a situation where you don't want to be plugging it in. So you're really, it's kind of a rare instance. You have to imagine you're in a place that's very cold like this. You have to discharge the battery to the point where now it's discharged enough that I want to charge it again. And it has to then sit for a while without discharging, because it would kind of keep itself warm if you were discharging it. But if it sits long enough after that, then it gets internally to 0 degrees or below-ish. And then you don't want to charge it, because what happens if you charge it in that scenario? You will, it's kind of like with lead batteries, how it's called a process of sulfation, where there's this crystalline structure that forms on the metal plates that prevents a charge from going through the electrolyte after that. So lead acids are easy to destroy that way. In a similar way, lithiums don't actually have near as much of a problem with that, and that's why they last so much longer, unless you try to charge them at 0 degrees or below. Because then there is this crystallization that happens. It's not sulfation because there's no sulfate in there, but it's a similar idea where crystals start to form inside the cells that destroy the battery's ability to charge and discharge after that. And so you might not destroy the battery entirely, but you'll damage it if you charge it at 0 degrees. And so obviously you don't want to do that. You bought a battery for whatever price you bought because it told you it has 3,000 life cycles. But if you charge it at 0 degrees even just once, you'll probably destroy a large number of those cycles that are available. And if you do that 2, 3, 4 times, you'll probably kill the battery entirely. I don't know how many times you'd have to do it in order to kill the battery. But I wouldn't dare to do it even once, because it will cause extensive damage, is what I've heard. So the assumption that we're running on here is that you're in that rare situation where you need to heat the battery up without waiting to let it sit in a room temperature room for a while. And so under that assumption, yes, you do want to pay the $20 extra for the heaters that come internal to the battery. And so let's look at how those work, because they have some copy here. If we just type for heat, it says self-heating batteries, automotive grade LiFePO, with heating pads too. So it says pads plural. It doesn't say how many, but that usually means 2, 1 on each side of the cells. To protect it from overcharge, yada yada. Automatic self-heating is equipped with an automatic self-heating function that will be activated by the BMS when the battery is connected to a charger at -4 to 4 degrees. The heating will be stopped when the battery temperature reaches 41 degrees. Okay, so this works kind of uniquely for each battery. So I took some notes on the 4 batteries that we're going to be looking at in this stream to see exactly what each of them do. So for this Vautrare, the charge will cut off when it hits below 4 degrees, is what I read there. And then when does the heater come on after that? Does it come on automatically? For the Vautrare, they don't specify that. And that is kind of an important point, I think. If anybody's trying to sell me a battery that has an internal heater, I want to know exactly when that heater turns on and turns off, so that I can test whether it's functioning properly. And so they don't say, does the heater turn on as soon as low temp cutoff engages? And what the common thing, I think, for most of these is the heater is not going to be running at the same time as charge or discharge. And so because the heater protects from danger during charge, I don't think it would cut off a discharge, but I'm not sure about that. It doesn't specify that either. I think what it's saying is when low temp cutoff triggers, it triggers because a charge is happening when the temperature is too low. And so it cuts it off and turns the heaters on instead. And then it will keep the heaters on until the temperature of the battery rises to above 41 degrees. So that seems pretty straightforward, except I think on the Vatra in particular, we have some other information here that I found very confusing. I want to make sure you guys can see this. Yep, it's right above my head. This battery with self-heating cannot be connected with the regular version 12-volt 100 amp hour battery model in series or in parallel. The battery will activate the heating function only when the charging current is more than 10 amps. So there's two very important points there that I want to hone in on, because both of those things make this battery a non-starter in my opinion. I would, if both of those things are true, if either of those things are true, I would never buy this battery because it's kind of silly in my opinion. So let's zoom in on that. The series or parallel is very important to me, because if I buy one of these Vatras, I want to know that I can upgrade to a second pack for either more capacity in the future if I wire the two in parallel, or higher voltage in the future if I wire the two in series. And in fact, most of these 100 amp hour packs, you should be able to wire 4 in series or 4 in parallel, or both. If you do both, that's up to a 16 battery bank. So if you bought 16 of these and wired them 4 by 4, you could get 4 times as much voltage and 4 times as much capacity. And I want to be able to, I want to know that my battery can do that, even if I just buy one of them, because what if I want to upgrade in the future? So they're saying you cannot upgrade this battery for more capacity or more voltage in the future if you buy the heated version. The way I read this, at least, it says you cannot connect it with the regular version, which I take to mean the one that doesn't have heaters. I think that's what they mean here, and that's really annoying. That would make me feel like, well, the 20 bucks extra for the heaters comes with these caveats that are just no thank you. But if you compare this product listing to the exact same listing on their website, if we just jump over here for a second, let me see if I can find it. Let's see, search for the word heat again. No, that's just the comments. I know it was written up here somewhere. Oh, let's search for series versus parallel. Here we go. So it says, and this is, by the way, the exact same photo as the Amazon listing. So we see here low temp charge, self-heating. Exact same thing here, low temp charge, self-heating. Sorry, oh, it's different. Low temp cutoff protection, but it does say that this one can self-heat as well. Let's go back. I'm sure that I saw this one able to, here we go. Low temp, self-heating. Where's the heating? It doesn't say. Oh, you know what? This is the version that doesn't have heaters. Interesting. Okay, so this is where the confusion was. See, I was looking closely for all of these listings at what features they offer, and it can be very confusing. So I missed the fact that this version on their website, it says upgraded low temp cutoff battery. This one has low temp cutoff. It does not have heaters internally, and it is exactly the same price as the one on Amazon that does have a heater. So puzzle out how that works for me. I have no idea. Personally, I probably wouldn't buy either of these batteries just because the copy is so confusing. But then there was the second of these points here. That's just the first part that's confusing, series versus parallel. And then they also said the battery will activate the heating function only when the charging current is more than 10 amps. And that to me is an automatic deal breaker, because if you think about when you're charging any battery, what kind of charger do you have? Well, some people have a 10 amp charger, some people have a 5 amp or a 3 amp or a 2 amp trickle charger. Maybe you have a 20 amp charger, and that's pretty high power for lithium typically. I think the average is 10 amps, but it says this has to be charging at more than 10 amps to activate the heating function. And that's, first of all, like, why is it only going to activate the heating function if you're charging at 10 amps? If you're charging at 5 amps and your battery happens to be at 0 degrees in that moment, it's still going to cause some damage. It's not probably going to damage as much as if you were charging at 10 amps, but it's still going to cause some damage. And so why wouldn't they set that lower? Shouldn't it be entirely based on the temperature? If it hits that low temperature, it shouldn't be charging at all, in my opinion. And so this kind of defeats the purpose of having a heater in the first place. And so I wouldn't buy this battery because of that. So you can see this is the lowest priced self-heating battery that I could find on Amazon, and that's why we started with it. But as you can see, like I was saying, you get what you pay for a little bit. There's some weird caveats with this one, so I personally wouldn't buy this one. There is a link in the description below if you want to check it out for yourself. But I want to move on to the next one. Let's see if we got any comments. We got Ryder2022 saying, "Hi, can the battery low temperature be programmed in the batteries, or is it set?" I believe with these cheap budget batteries, the temperature cutoff is fixed. You cannot go and program it, as far as I know. In fact, most BMSs that are available in batteries you'd buy off of Amazon are going to be somewhat fixed. There are exceptions to that, but they're more and more rare. Because I think what these manufacturers have found is that when they open the door to lots of programming settings in the BMS, people accidentally set their packs to the wrong settings, and they create damage in some kind of solar system that they're building, or whatever the application is. And if you use the wrong settings in the BMS, and then you plug into an inverter that those settings are incompatible with, you could, in theory, damage the batteries, and that happens sometimes. And so I think a lot of these manufacturers just decided we're gonna set these BMSs all to a generic default. We're not going to let the consumer change them at all anymore. That doesn't mean there's no such thing as a programmable BMS anymore, but the BMSs that are programmable are often much more expensive than the ones you find in these cheap budget packs. And if you buy those programmable BMSs, it's typically because you're going to get the BMS on your own, and you're going to buy the cells separately, and you're going to build a custom pack for yourself from scratch. So that actually can come out a little bit less expensive than even these budget packs sometimes. It's fairly similar price, but I do like the idea of having control of those things too. So that is available. Excuse me. I think the BMS that I recall off the top of my head, there's a couple of popular brands out there. I'm trying to remember the name of the programmable BMS that I was most familiar with. I was looking into it a few months ago. I'll have to pull it up and see if I can leave the name of it in the comments later, because I can't recall the name of it off the top of my head. But let's look at the second battery of the four that we're going to look at today. And see if the features on this one are a little bit different. So we have 12 volt 100 amp hour, 12 volt 100 amp hour mini, and the difference between these two, a lot of you guys have probably seen the minis that are now available. There's, I think, 3 or 4 different brands that are doing these minis now. They have a more compact form of these cells that put out the same energy and capacity. So they fit in a smaller case, but they are sold typically at a premium. A lot of these came down for the holidays. So this one from Lifetime is being sold for $249 right now, which is a pretty good price. I want to say this one was selling at $280 or something like that just a few months ago, but it's come down. I think they're trying to blow out the rest of their holiday stock. So that's a really good price for the Mini, but this has no heating capability whatsoever. So if you go over to the heated version, then you can see this one costs $60 more. So the deal on the Mini is $249, and then you're going to pay $310 for the version that has the heater. And keep in mind too, this is not the Mini, even though it's the exact same capacity, 100 amp hours, 100 amp hours. This one has a heater, but it also has the older version of those cells that take up a lot more space. So this one's not quite twice as big as this one that has the same capacity, but it's maybe 60% larger, if I remember correctly. And I don't think they have a mini version that has a heater yet. And so if you're looking for very compact and self-heating in the same package, I don't know of any LiFePO battery that's available with those features. You can actually set up like an Arduino system to self-heat a battery manually using just a heating pad. I've seen people do DIY projects like that before, and I might do a project like that in the future if you guys are interested. You have to let me know in the comments if you'd want to see a DIY self-heated battery project where you attach a heater to a battery that doesn't have one yet. That's definitely possible. But this one has a heater. It's the bigger version. It costs $60 more anyway. And let's see what it says about the heating. So automatic self-heating function will drop below, so it will begin heating as soon as it drops below 41 degrees. So this is the interesting thing about the LiTime is it has a much higher trigger to turn the heaters on, which I thought was a little bit strange, honestly. It seems to me that if you get a battery that has a heater in it, you're going to want to balance between how much energy it's wasting on the heater versus making sure that it doesn't charge when it's too cold and cause damage. So we know that right at about 0 degrees Fahrenheit, there's going to be damage if you charge the battery. So you never want it to get that low. But also, there's two different ways to solve that. You could activate the heater well before it gets to 0 degrees so that it never gets near that, and then you're always safe. Or you could check if it's at 0 degrees or below, and if it is, then you heat it, right? Because if you, there's two different schools of thought there. If you never let it get too low, but you have it set at a high enough threshold that the heater is always activating unnecessarily when it's way too soon for it to activate, you might be just losing a lot of the battery's energy on it heating itself when it doesn't really need to. Whereas if it gets so cold that it has a long range of temperature to catch back up to where it needs to be, that might use too much energy also. So the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle there. Should you activate the heater at 0 degrees or 10 degrees or 20 degrees or 30 degrees? LiTime activates the heater at 41 degrees for some reason. That seems really high to me. But I haven't ever needed one of these heaters, so I don't know if that's necessary. But it seems to me it's quite likely that this battery will never get cold because it's always activating its heater very readily as soon as it drops below 41 degrees. I think the problem with that, though, is you'd find that this battery, if you take it out in the cold, is running to 0 faster than you'd expect because it's constantly activating the heater when maybe it's a little bit premature to do so. So let's look at the notes here and see the Vautrère. We're not sure when the heater turns on, but it seems to imply that it turns on whenever the low temp cutoff activates, and then the heater turns off again when it gets above 41 degrees, which sounds reasonable to me. As soon as you're in that 30, 40, 50 range, it's probably safe to be charging your battery again. And then the LiTime activates the heater as soon as it drops below 41 degrees, and then it turns it off again when it hits 50 degrees or above. So it's got a much more stringent threshold for how warm the battery has to be at all times. So it's definitely going to be using a lot more of the battery's total energy to keep itself warm if you have it in a cold climate for an extended period of time. Now, that is a difference of $289.99 for that one and $310 for this one. It's just 20 bucks more. Between the two, I would probably buy this one because of the caveats that we talked about. Those other funny quirks about the Vautrère, I don't really like those. So the LiTime seems like a better pick overall, even though I would be concerned that it would drain itself too quickly. And then if we look at the next one, we're going to see that the Power Queen, I think, probably has the exact same BMS in it as the LiTime, because I looked through all of the specs in the notes here, and it is identical to the LiTime as far as how the heater works. And so the drop below 41, heater turns on. Go above 50, heater turns off again. It's exactly the same for both of them. So it seems to me it's probably a default setting of the BMS that both of those companies just leave in place and they don't do anything to change it. So it's likely that they are both using the same BMS. If anybody has broken into either of these batteries and knows the current brand that they're using lately of BMS in here, because there's half a dozen common BMS brands that all of these batteries use, and you never really know what you're going to get from each of them. Sometimes they design and manufacture their own BMS, but that usually makes the battery a little bit more expensive. So you can expect the LifePos that are in this $200 to $300 range, they probably have some cheap BMS that they got from another company. And so Lifetime versus Power Queen, I expect it's going to be exactly the same experience, whether you buy one or the other. So really the only difference would be the price, except the price for Lifetime and Power Queen are identical also on the heated version. But check this out. Lifetime is charging $310 for the heated version. Power Queen $310 for the heated version. Lifetime is charging $250 for the mini, and Power Queen is charging $229.99 for the mini. So if you want the mini rather than the heater, the Power Queen's obviously the better deal right now. Lifetime, I think, got a lot of praise from YouTubers who were doing battery teardowns over the past year, and that's why they were going at a little bit of a premium, I think, to everybody else. But I would bet that if you popped open a Power Queen, you'd see something very similar to what you see inside a Lifetime. I'm not sure who owns either of these companies. When they're in China, they're pretty hard to track down. But I would be fine with buying either the Lifetime or the Power Queen. Both of these prices, by the way, are really good, I think, for what you get out of either of these minis. $229 or $249 for 100 amp hours. Really good price, especially considering that mini is extremely compact. Yeah, no problem, Ryder. My pleasure. Any other questions you want to ask? I'll get to everybody's questions at the end also, so we'll take a little time for that. Yeah, let me know where you're hailing from. Let me know what you need lithium batteries for. I'm always happy to help. And we're going to look at one more aside from this Power Queen, because there's always a range of prices and features available. And so I just want to cover the gamut a little bit of what I found on Amazon. So we're going to end with the Battleborn, because Battleborn is kind of known as one of the early adopters of lithium iron phosphate technology in the United States. And they are in tight with the sailing community. If you asked any sailboat in, say, the 2015 to 2020 timeframe, which battery manufacturer is the best in the business, they'd all say Battleborn, because Battleborn, I think, did a blitz of just great customer service across the sailing industry and convinced everybody to buy Battleborn batteries, which is totally fine, because back then there weren't near as many competitors. All the competitors were charging an arm and a leg for lithium iron phosphate batteries. And so Battleborn came out with a very expensive offering that was, I think they consider it justified, because it is very high quality compared to competitors. So for example, if you look at this 100 amp hour pack, this pack has slightly larger dimensions than any of these others that we've looked at, because it has cylindrical cells inside. And cylindrical cells are a little bit more high quality in a lot of ways to prismatic cells, because they're each individually packaged in a package about this big, rather than one cell being this big. And so because each one of those cells has temperature protection inherent to it, it has a little cap for thermal venting in case one of those cells goes bad. So it's much more likely that if you had any issue with a cell inside this pack, that it would damage like a 20th of the total capacity, rather than damaging a quarter of the capacity. When you have prismatic cells, you have one of them fail, and you've lost a large chunk of the capability of the pack. So just for that, these Battleborn batteries are a little bit higher quality. They also, I think, used to argue that their cells are A grade. Nobody really says that anymore because I think the jury's uh, the word has kind of gotten out that nobody really needs A grade unless you're putting these batteries in a car. But they also have these nice high quality brass terminals on top where most people just use the standard quarter-inch lugs. And so there's a handful of things that are valuable about the Battleborn batteries. But I think the biggest thing is from what I've heard, I've never owned a Battleborn battery, but from what I've heard, they have incredible customer service. They have, first of all, people who speak English as a first language ready to answer the phone and help you out if you have any problem with their product. And even the companies that do have an office in the States, I'm not going to name any names, but there's a handful that do a lot of advertising, and they order the cells from China and they put them in a box and they put an American logo on the front, and then they say, we've got a huge, amazing warranty, and then you try and call them up and they don't answer the phone. But Battleborn, from what I've heard, is not one of those companies. If you have a problem with the Battleborn pack, there's somebody who will help you, and they'll help you quickly, and they're very knowledgeable. But they definitely charge for it. Because if you look at the price of this thing, compared to what everything else we looked at, we had 289, 310, 310, and 999. And we're looking at packs that are all exactly the same capacity, 100 amp hours for the first one we looked at, second one, third one, all 100 amp hours. This one is also 100 amp hours, and they're charging more than 3 times as much as the cheapest one that we look at. So that's what you get from Battleborn. They'll charge you an arm and a leg, but they'll give you good quality product, good quality service. That's what I've heard, at least. I've never owned one of these. They do have a heater in this battery, and I believe they, just like everybody else, they charge a little bit extra for the version that has a heater. The thing that's frustrating about Battleborn, though, is as high quality as I've heard they are, they don't give us any specs on the temperature. So I don't know when the heater activates. I don't know when it turns off and when it turns on. I don't know what the low temp cutoff setting is. I don't know if you can program it. I don't see anything about Bluetooth in here. Like, there's very little information about how the heating system works here, even though it seems to be fairly prominently featured, especially since here you can pick the 100 amp hour 12 volt regular. Okay, for $75 less, you get the regular 100 amp hour, and then you upgrade to the heated version for $75 more. And so over here, I wrote all the details, and I had to leave all of the Battleborn details as question marks because they don't really tell us anything. I looked on their website too, and I couldn't find any information about the heating triggers. What temperature does it cut off? What temperature does the heater turn on and off? I don't know. I suppose you would have to call them if you're interested in the Battleborn battery. But that to me is kind of annoying. They should just list that in the spec sheet so that we don't have to chase them down for it. But if you like the idea of a big warranty and good customer service and you don't want to ever have to DIY anything about your battery yourself, then Battleborn might be a good pick for you. Personally, I'm in the opposite camp of that. I have no qualms about tearing a battery open and replacing the BMS if I need to. And so I much prefer the stuff on the cheaper end. So of the 4 that we looked at, I would personally probably buy the Lifetime or the Power Queen of the 4 that we looked at. And honestly, I probably, even if I lived in Montana and I was at the top of a mountain where it's just snowing all the time during this time of year, I probably wouldn't buy the heated version anyway, because the first thing I would do is put a temperature sensor inside the battery and see if it ever gets to 0 degrees in the first place. Because if it doesn't, then I'm not going to buy the heater. And if it does, but I'm in a situation where I can do something to get the battery back up to the right temperature on its own. For example, I can take it and put it into a room temperature spot and let it warm up, or if I need to leave it there, if I can put some kind of insulation around it so that I don't have to buy a heater, that's what I'm going to do instead before I worry about the heater. Can your batteries be destroyed by the cold weather? Absolutely. Should you pay extra to prevent that from ever happening? Probably not in most cases, because in my opinion, especially if we're talking about marine situations where for like an ice fisherman, probably not ever going to be an issue. But you should check for your conditions, for your lake, how cold does it get? and especially internally to your battery. How cold does the battery get on the inside while you're using it? Do you ever need a heater? If yes, then you think about buying one of these batteries that has a heater. So that is a lot of information about heaters and batteries in general. I'm going to leave it up to the comments for you guys to ask questions. We're going to see if we have enough people to do the giveaway. We probably are not going to be able to do the giveaway. It's been slow this Christmas season because everybody packed their boats in for the winter, and the channel is very young. We got a little bit over 1,000 subscribers so far, so we're just going to keep going until we build it up for enough people to see what we're doing here. And then we'll be able to do the giveaway as soon as possible. But we got another comment from Ryder. What do we got here? Are lithium iron phosphate batteries a replacement for all battery use cases? I just got a LiFePO 4 for my motorcycle, and it struggles to turn the motor over. Maybe I need more amperage. Just curious. Yeah, great question. So, unfortunately, I think you've purchased a LiFePO for the one reason out of 1,000 that it's probably best to stay with lead acid. When you need to crank a motor, lead acid is still the king, I think, and that will probably be the case forever into the future. The thing with lead acid versus all types of lithium is better in every way at deep cycle applications. So anytime you have a situation where you have a steady amount of current that needs to flow across several minutes or even hours or even days, that's deep cycle, and that's where lithium shines. But if you have any situation where you need to just jolt hundreds or thousands of amps for 5 seconds, that's where lead acid shines. Because lead acid is super heavy and bulky and annoying, and it can leak if it's not sealed. If you buy the more expensive one that is sealed, then it has its own problems too. They don't last near as long. They last like a sixth as many life cycles. So lead acid is terrible in every way, except it's really good at just punching out a giant number of amps for 5 seconds. That's why we have lead acid in every car still. Most boat motors still use lead acid. You can use a lithium battery to start your motorcycle because among gas motors and diesel motors, a motorcycle motor is the smallest form factor that you get to where it's still useful to take you down the road. And so the battery, if it's lead, can be very small. If it's lithium, you could probably crank your motor with a larger lithium battery. Because I don't remember the rating on your typical motorcycle starter. I've got a Harley 1200, but I don't remember the spec on the battery on mine. I have thought about replacing it with a lithium, but the problems that you run into with lithium are several when you try and connect it to a starter. Just the fact that it jolts potentially hundreds of amps in a small number of seconds is potentially dangerous for a lot of lithium batteries. And the primary reason that is because the BMS that's connected to every lithium battery, basically lead acid batteries don't have a circuit board installed inside because they don't need it, because they can handle 500, 600, 700 amps, no problem, as long as you only do that for 5 seconds. But a lithium battery has a computer circuit called a BMS always installed inside that needs to regulate all these things that we talked about earlier. And so if you try and run 500 amps through that, it's likely to damage the circuit. So that circuit has over current protection a lot of the time, in addition to all the other stuff we talked about. Often a battery of the size that we looked at today, we got the Power Queen right here. This has you can see it right above, it says 100 amp BMS. That means if you push 150 amps into it, it's probably going to kick on an overcurrent protection mode where it goes into safety mode and it just prevents you from touching the cells after that. And so if you bought a motorcycle LiFePO, you probably bought a smaller one than this. And typically if you have a smaller size than this, it's going to have a smaller BMS also. So often, I think I've got this 18 amp hour, which is about the size of your typical motorcycle lead acid battery, This thing has a 50 amp BMS in it. So if I pull more than 50 amps out of this, it's going to trigger overcurrent protection fairly quickly. Actually, I believe this one is designed so that it can trigger a little bit higher than that. Because what they're doing with these small lithiums now is a lot of manufacturers are getting a little bit sneaky. They want people to keep buying these as much as possible, and so they'll try and pretend sometimes that these are fine for starting a motorcycle. I've seen product listings on lithiums this size that say these are good for cranking, and they're really not. What happens is, unless you've got a version of LifePo that is legitimately high amp output, then you shouldn't be cranking a motor with it. And typically, the versions of lithium that can do that high output are a lot more expensive. So I paid like $60 for this, but a legitimately high output version of this battery would cost something like $200. It would cost 4 or 5 times as much. And so it becomes not worth it when you could get a lead acid battery instead, which is slightly less expensive than this one. So for the price, lead acid just does the job way better. And there are all kinds of other issues with plugging lithium into a starter in general. So every starter has an alternator that it's working with at the same time to charge the battery back up. And a lot of alternators have trouble being attached to lithium because when they when they idle, they're expecting a certain amount of resistance on that battery, and they're all built expecting a lead acid resistance, and because lithium resistance is much lower, the alternator will often idle too hot and too high, and it'll burn itself out eventually. So there are ways to fix that too. To make a long story short, it's just very complicated to plug lithium into any starter, whether it's a motorcycle or a boat or a car or whatever. So the way to simplify it for yourself is just to remember, if you're cranking a motor, you probably want to stick with lead acid instead. Maybe all of these problems will be solved with lithium at some point in the future by some new piece of technology that somebody comes up with. But honestly, I doubt it. We're probably going to be off to using something else besides lithium before that happens. These LifePos, I think, will be the go-to best battery for deep cycle through the 2020s, and then it might be something else in the 2030s, who knows. But I think through that whole time, lead acid will still remain the king of starting motors. So hopefully that answers your question. And let's see. Triumph Rocket 2500, nice. That makes me jealous. That's pretty cool. I've seen people talk about making their own battery. Thoughts on this? Yeah. So I have one custom battery that I'm working on for a boat project that I'm probably not going to debut until sometime mid-2024. I built it a few months ago, actually. It's made of lithium NMC cells, and I don't have any LifePo cells here, but there are lots of people who do custom LifePo batteries. The thing is with custom batteries, it makes perfect sense, in my opinion, if you have a custom project that requires something unique, that it has requirements that don't match anything you can buy off the shelf. The thing with batteries is, and depending on the chemistry too, you may find if you try and DIY the battery from scratch, you may not save that much money anymore. And that's very much the case, I think, with LifePo 4 right now. Because LifePo 4 has so much competition and is becoming so commoditized because it's the go-to chemistry for EVs in China. The government in China has stipulated that if you're making an electric vehicle, you have to use LifePos because they've been deemed the safest lithium, and so they're just manufacturing them by the millions, and that's why the prices are coming down so fast, and why we see 10, 20 of these competitors popping up every day. They're basically taking the hand-me-downs from the EV industry in China, shipping the cells overseas, putting them in plastic boxes, and selling them to us. And so the batteries are coming way down in price. If you go and build one on your own, if you order some raw cells and you order a BMS and you wire it up and you put it in your own box, for LifePo, that'll probably save you 10 to 15% on the cost. So right now you can get this battery for $230. If you tried to build this from scratch, buying all the components yourself, it would probably cost you something close to $200. And so for LifePo, it's feeling very much like I could build one from scratch, but it doesn't really seem worth it. With other chemistries, very much not true. There are lots of situations where, like, I'm wondering if I have some NMC cells that I can show you. I know I have some kicking around. Here we go. I got one right here. So these are lithium NMC 18650s. This is the stuff that you get in laptops and server farms, and this is the battery that they used to use in old Teslas. They've upgraded to a different one now, but these are a little bit higher power than LifePos. And because they're much less popular now, because LifePo is kind of taking over in China, you're finding less and less of these, and the ones that they manufactured a few years ago, they're just trying to blow out the stock, and so you can get these ridiculously cheap, especially if you get them recycled. I bought this cell, I think, has a little over 2 amp hours, and I got it for a little over $1. And I bought a few hundred of them. So I paid a few $100 and got several kilowatt hours of battery energy, because these are super valuable if you want to build a battery from scratch and you want it to fit in a very compact space. So often when you look at DIY battery builds on YouTube, they're mostly using these because the price and the power to weight ratio that you get out of them, this is kind of where it's at right now. There are safety concerns with these, of course. These are more dangerous than LifePos. LifePos will almost never catch fire. These ones, if you put a nail through this, it'll create a flame for sure. And so if you pack 100 of these into a small space, that's definitely a fire hazard if you don't take the proper precautions. So these are fun to play with, slightly volatile. Yeah, I have a pack in the other room that I put together. You wire these together and connect a BMS to each series string, and you've got yourself a battery. It's fairly basic to build your own battery from scratch. It's just the main question is it cost effective? With these, it's extremely cost effective. If you try and buy a pack made of these off the shelf, it can be stupidly expensive. Perfect example. I don't know if you're into boats. We've been talking about motorcycles, but Torqeedo uses these in their battery that goes on the head unit. And if you price their battery out compared to building a DIY version, it's like 10 to 1. They charge like $1,000. I don't remember what the battery costs by itself. It's like 800 or 900, $1,000 or something like that. If you built that same battery from scratch, it would cost you like $75. That's the crazy differential you'll get with certain types of lithium. This one is kind of the big cost saver if you DIY it right now. So yeah, it all depends. Let's see. Yeah, exactly. It's not worth it if it's LifePo. Definitely worth it if it's some other types. And there's a dozen different chemistries we could talk about. I don't want to bore you with all of the different ideas I have for battery builds in the future. But if you subscribe to the channel, you'll see some of that stuff come up in the future. So I think with that, I'm gonna wrap up pretty soon. Unless we have anybody else in the chat wants to leave a comment or ask a question, let us know where you're from. We are not going to be able to do the giveaway today. We don't have quite enough people in the chat, but do please smash the like button anyway, so that anybody watching this after the fact can see that this is happening next week. We do 2 p.m. Pacific every single Sunday right now, and I'm going to keep doing that into the future until we have enough people to get this prize given away. I'm planning to have the Eagle Ray channel going for the long haul. So you guys will see me here doing the same thing next year and the year after. Anything electric boats, and not just electric propulsion on boats, but anything electric, wiring, solar panels. We got a lot of fun projects coming up on the channel in the future. So I am not really able to get out on the lake right now because it's plenty cold, and they shut down my usual launch spot. I usually launch out of Site 6 on Lake Havasu, and they closed it down because they're doing huge renovations there, I guess. I got to find another launch spot. If anybody is familiar with Havasu and knows another popular launch spot, I'm looking for one right now. So that's kind of getting in my way while I'm trying to get on the water to make videos. But I do plan to have a new video coming out soon. We have the dual thruster project in the works. Video coming on that hopefully in the next few days. I've been saying that for a little while, but the holidays have just been getting in the way left and right. But that is coming soon. So I'm going to let you guys go unless you guys have any other questions. Thanks, Ryder. He says, what's your next project? After the dual thruster project, we've got lots of battery and trolling motor reviews coming on the channel. As the spring season starts, I think that's what people want to see a lot of. But I have a million ideas. For the dual thruster project, the box that I showed off in a video from a few weeks ago has a custom circuit board that I've designed that does PWM. It does automatic lift and deploy using the actuators that we've seen on the channel. And it's going to do automatic switching with built-in relays. So there's a lot of stuff about that. That little box has a whole bunch of project ideas all built into one that is going to be showing up on several videos probably through January and maybe into February. And then after that, I don't know what the next project will be. We'll do battery video reviews, and then you guys will have to let me know what you want to see. I've got ideas for like an electric surfboard project that I want to build. I've got the pontoon boat that I'm going to be doing an electric conversion on. There's a million directions we could go. I got 300 video ideas, and I haven't had time for hardly any of them yet. The channel is less than a year old, and so we've got plenty of time to figure out what's coming next. But I appreciate you coming by and hanging out. Let your friends know that we've got the giveaway going. Let them know that we're back next week doing the same thing, same time. And yeah, I'm going to wrap up, and I do hope you guys have a happy holiday and have a good one.